Red and blue, pulsating, blinding, they painted the night sky, turning the ordinary into a scene from a nightmare. A crowd had gathered, drawn in by the spectacle of flashing lights and the symphony of sirens. Whispers snaked through the throng, each hushed word carrying a weight of anticipation. Something was about to break. The air hung thick with a tension you could taste. A bitter cocktail of fear and anger, seasoned with the metallic tang of adrenaline. It pressed down on everyone present, a suffocating blanket of unease. In the eye of this storm stood two figures, locked in a silent battle of wills. Officer Jackson, his name tag a beacon against the dark fabric of his uniform, stood tall. The weight of his badge felt heavier today, a symbol of authority and responsibility that he had sworn to uphold. The streets were quieter than usual, but the tension in the air was palpable, almost suffocating. He had been in countless situations, each one a test of his resolve and commitment to the oath he had taken. Today was no different, yet it felt uniquely challenging. His face, normally etched with a kind smile, was a mask of stoicism. The lines on his forehead, usually softened by laughter, were now deep and pronounced. His eyes, which often sparkled with warmth, were cold and calculating, scanning the scene for any signs of escalation. He knew that one wrong move could turn the situation from tense to explosive in a heartbeat. Years on the force had taught him to present an unreadable front, especially in situations as volatile as this. He had learned to control his emotions, to keep his fears and doubts hidden behind a facade of confidence. It was a skill that had saved his life more than once. But today, the stakes felt higher, the risks more personal. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on him. But behind the calm facade, his jaw was clenched tight, his pulse a drumbeat against his temples. Sweat trickled down his back, a physical manifestation of the stress he was under. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud and insistent, reminding him of the gravity of the situation. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to spring into action if needed. Opposite him stood a man fueled by rage. The man's eyes were wild, darting around as if searching for an escape or a target. His fists were clenched, knuckles white with the intensity of his anger. He was breathing heavily, each exhale a growl of frustration and hatred. The space between them crackled with unspoken threats and potential violence. His face, contorted in a mask of hate, was flushed in unhealthy red. Veins bulged on his forehead and neck, pulsing with the rhythm of his fury. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with a mix of rage and desperation. It was a face that spoke of years of pent-up anger, of grievances that had festered and grown into a monstrous hatred. Spittle flew from his lips as he spewed venomous words, each syllable laced with a lifetime's worth of prejudice. His voice was hoarse from shouting, yet he showed no signs of stopping. Each word was a weapon, aimed to wound and provoke. The officer knew that engaging verbally would only add fuel to the fire, but the man's relentless tirade was hard to ignore. He was a man on the edge, ready to shatter. The officer could see the signs of extreme stress, the twitching muscles, the erratic breathing. It was a delicate balance, a tightrope walk between de-escalation and confrontation. Officer Jackson knew that he had to tread carefully, to find a way to defuse the situation without compromising his own safety or the safety of others. The next few moments would be crucial, a test of his training, his patience, and his humanity. Officer Jackson had seen this kind of hate before. It lived in the narrowed eyes of strangers, in the muttered slurs disguised as jokes. It clung to him like a shadow, a constant reminder of the weight he carried on his shoulders. The weight of his badge, a symbol of both protection and persecution. He knew this confrontation was different. The raw animosity radiating from the man before him was palpable, a tangible force. This wasn't just about a traffic stop or a noise complaint. This was about something deeper, something uglier, rooted in the very fabric of their beings. The man's finger jabbed accusingly at Officer Jackson's chest, a conductor's baton directing a symphony of hate. His voice, hoarse from shouting, dripped with venom. Then, with a roar that seemed to split the night, he lunged, his fist, propelled by years of simmering resentment, connected with Officer Jackson's jaw. The world seemed to fall silent. The sirens faded into the background, the murmuring crowd a distant echo. In that single, sickening moment, reality itself seemed to warp and twist, the boundaries of the natural world blurring at the edges. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors, a dizzying spiral of light and sound. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart, leaving behind a surreal landscape that defied all logic and reason. The colors were so vivid they seemed to pulse with a life of their own, intertwining and dancing in a chaotic yet mesmerizing pattern. The sounds, too, were unlike anything he had ever heard, a symphony of dissonance that both intrigued and unsettled him. It was a moment suspended in time, where the boundaries between the real and the unreal blurred into oblivion. When Officer Jackson opened his eyes, the world had shifted on its axis. He found himself in a place that was both familiar and alien, a twisted reflection of the reality he once knew. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant echoes of a world that seemed just out of reach. He felt a strange sense of disorientation, as if he had been plucked from one dimension and dropped into another. His mind raced to make sense of the bizarre surroundings, but the more he tried to understand, the more elusive the answers became. He was no longer staring at the hate-filled face of his aggressor. The anger and hostility that had once been so palpable were now replaced by an overwhelming sense of confusion and fear. It was as if the very essence of the confrontation had been stripped away, leaving behind only the raw, unfiltered emotions that lay beneath the surface. The tension in the air was almost tangible, a silent testament to the inexplicable shift that had taken place. Instead, he was met with the confused, fearful gaze of a man who looked eerily familiar. There was something hauntingly recognizable about the man's features, a sense of déjà vu that sent a shiver down Officer Jackson's spine. The man's eyes were wide with fear, mirroring the uncertainty and bewilderment that Jackson himself felt. It was as if he were looking into a distorted mirror, seeing a reflection of his own inner turmoil and confusion. The man before him wore a uniform just like his, the badge a mirror image of his own. But something was different. There was an uncanny resemblance, yet subtle differences that hinted at a deeper, more profound connection. The uniform, though identical in design, seemed to carry a different weight, a different history. The badge, too, seemed to hold secrets that Jackson could not yet fathom. It was as if he were staring at an alternate version of himself, a parallel existence that defied all logic and reason. This man, this reflection, was younger, his skin pale and freckled. There was a youthful innocence in his eyes, a sense of naivety that Jackson had long since lost. The freckles on his face were like a constellation of memories, each one a reminder of a time when the world was simpler, less complicated. The younger man's expression was a mix of curiosity and fear, as if he were trying to understand the strange, inexplicable reality that had unfolded before him. In his eyes, Officer Jackson saw a flicker of himself, a younger, more naive version staring back. It was a moment of profound realization, a glimpse into a past that he had almost forgotten. The younger man's eyes held a spark of hope, a belief in the goodness of the world that Jackson had long since abandoned. It was a poignant reminder of the person he once was and the person he had become. As he stood there, staring into the eyes of his younger self, he couldn't help but wonder what had brought them to this surreal, inexplicable moment. Panic welled up in the other man's eyes as he looked around, taking in the scene. The crowd, now a sea of unfamiliar faces, stared back with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The roles had been reversed, the script flipped. The aggressor was now the accused, the victim the authority. Officer Jackson watched as understanding dawned on the man's face, his features paling as if drained of blood. The hate that had burned so brightly just moments ago was replaced by a chilling fear, a dawning realization of the situation he now found himself in. The man stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. The world around him seemed to blur, the faces in the crowd merging into a single, indistinguishable mass. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, each gaze a silent accusation, a question left unspoken. His hand instinctively reached for the weapon holstered at his hip, a reflex born of years of training and countless moments of fear. The cold metal was a familiar comfort, a reminder of the power he wielded, the authority he represented. But his fingers froze, hovering over the cold steel. In that moment, a flood of memories washed over him. Training sessions, moments of doubt, the faces of those he had sworn to protect. He was caught in a web of conflicting emotions, torn between duty and a newfound understanding. For the first time, perhaps, he saw the world through Officer Jackson's eyes. He saw the fear, the distrust, the constant vigilance that came with wearing a badge that didn't match the color of his skin. It was a perspective he had never truly considered, a reality he had been blind to. The ever-present threat of violence that came with wearing a badge that didn't match the color of his skin was now painfully clear. He understood the weight of the uniform, the burden of the badge, and the silent battles fought every day. The crowd, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, pressed closer. Their silence was deafening, a collective breath held in anticipation. The tension in the air was palpable, a living, breathing entity that seemed to wrap itself around him, constricting his movements, clouding his thoughts. Their gazes were heavy with unspoken judgment, each pair of eyes a mirror reflecting his own fears and doubts. He could feel the weight of their expectations, the pressure to act, to make a decision that would either diffuse the situation or ignite it further. The air crackled with a different kind of tension now, one that was charged with the potential for change. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched, the threads of fate being woven into a new pattern, one that held the promise of understanding and reconciliation, a collective holding of breath as they waited to see how this surreal drama would unfold. The man knew that his next move would be crucial, a defining moment that would either bridge the gap between them or widen it further. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come, ready to face the consequences of his actions. Officer Jackson, still reeling from the disorienting shift in reality, watched the man before him crumble. The rage that had fueled him was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of becoming the very thing he had always hated and feared. He could have let the man stew in his terror, let him experience the world from the other side of the badge. He could have exacted his revenge, a taste of the injustice that he and countless others had suffered for far too long. But something stopped him. Instead, Officer Jackson raised his hand slowly, a gesture of peace in the face of chaos. The crowd, responding to his unspoken command, began to disperse. The sirens, no longer drowned out by anger and fear, became audible again, their wails a somber reminder of the reality that awaited them all. As the world around them slowly returned to normal, the surreal interlude fading like a bad dream, one question lingered in the air. Had the experience truly changed anything? Only time would tell what echoes this night would leave in the silence of their hearts.